work that the Green Doctors will be doing for Johnnie Johnson, and it covers across all of our regions. I hope everybody's okay if we record the session. If you feel uncomfortable or anything about that, do feel free to turn off your camera. So we will start recording it, and we've got a short presentation that we want to go through initially. Thanks. So I'm Christine Scott. I'm the Wellbeing Lead at Johnnie Johnson, and it's great news that we have got the Green Doctor service working with us from the 1st of February. It does cover all of our Johnnie Johnson regions, and the Green Doctors will give people a helping hand in the home to reduce their energy costs and make measures towards that as well. So I'll pass over to Rebecca and Simon. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Goodwin. I'm the Regional Customer and Community Manager at Fortem. So Fortem are the repairs and maintenance provider working in partnership with Johnnie Johnson to maintain your home. Our operatives visit lots of properties and they meet lots of residents. So this gives us an opportunity to spread the word about the wonderful work that the Green Doctor carries out. We can also put you directly in touch with the Green Doctor if you do need some help. So I'll hand over to Simon and he'll tell you more about the Green Doctor and the help that they can provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca and Christine. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. So my name is Simon Kilshaw. I work for the environmental charity Groundwork. And Groundwork is a national environmental charity with various trusts in different parts of the country. So I work for Groundwork Yorkshire, and we run a variety of different projects. And one of the major projects that we run at Groundwork Yorkshire is the Green Doctor programme. This has been running for 12 years now in Yorkshire, and the Green Doctors are really here to help people who are struggling with energy bills, energy costs, cold homes. Our mission is to try and to prevent the number of excess winter deaths, and that would be the number of the deaths that occur in between November and March, in contrast to the other months of the year. And that, startlingly, that's an average of 32,000 excess winter deaths per year in England and Wales. That has risen in some years to over 50,000. But the extent of the issue is huge, and 11,400 of those deaths can be attributed to cold homes, directly to cold homes. So we're trying to prevent the excess winter deaths, improve health and well-being amongst vulnerable people. And the way we can do that is, I'll come onto those things in a little bit more detail later, but it's trying to maximise people's income so they can afford to perhaps heat their home more adequately, and that's obviously going to contribute to improved health and well-being, and can tackle other issues as well, which are relating to fuel poverty. Fuel poverty, the actual definition for fuel poverty would be if a household is spending more than 10% of their income on energy costs, and the remainder of the household income is not enough to have an adequate standard of living, then that household will be deemed to be in fuel poverty. There's also a low income, low energy efficiency model, and that's relating income to the poor thermal efficiency of housing property. The number of people who are in fuel poverty, that's risen quite dramatically. In 2020, that was 3.2 million. And now as we're going towards April 2023, when the price cap will be increased, we're looking around 8 million people who will be in fuel poverty, households, sorry, in England and Wales. So we're trying to tackle issues relating to fuel poverty, and those are quite wide and varied. We're trying to improve the energy efficiency of homes, and that's by the advice that we give. And I'll come into more detail on how we're able to do that. And in doing these things, in linking these things together, we're trying to, with health, maximising income, we're trying to reduce the pressure on health and other social care services. And also, as we're an environmental charity, we're also trying to support the environment with things such as like carbon savings and energy efficiency advice that we give can help to support the environment. Okay, I'll just come on to in a little bit more detail of how we can actually support people. Okay, so we're a team of 20 Green Doctors. And we deliver home visits and telephone advice calls, and that depends on the nature of the issue. A typical home visit would last between an hour and a half, and a highly trained specialized green doctor would be able to offer energy efficiency advice, and that's very much in the home, tailored, bespoke advice. And that really is different because each case and how each household uses energy and how we place items, how we set up our energy tariffs is different for each household. And so we're given advice, and that's very much so important these days as we're in the cost of living crisis. Energy efficiency advice is really coming to an absolute priority. We can do that in various niche ways, and I'll come on again a little bit more detail about energy efficiency advice around the home. We can apply for things like energy efficiency grants. So that would be depending on the type of tenancy. So if we're talking social housing, we might be looking for certain welfare support grants that may be available in that particular council area. That may be fuel vouchers. As green doctors, we're able to issue fuel vouchers in many of the areas that we work in. That does depend on what's available in what particular council. But to give you an idea of the number of people who are really struggling with emergency fuel payments, we've given about £247,000 in emergency fuel payments since April. That was April to December, and that's just give a little bit of an idea of the scale of the issue of people who are struggling to pay their energy bills and make ends meet. A lot of people are struggling, as I mentioned, a lot of people are struggling in the cost of living crisis. So we're advising people about energy debt, repayment plans. We're in touch with energy suppliers. So we having a three-way conversation with the tenant, with the energy supplier, and ourselves. And that can be quite difficult for someone who maybe lacks the capacity or lacks the patience to get through to an energy supplier to maybe discuss the tariff or maybe to try and set up a repayment plan. And so having a skilled green doctor advisor there in the house to be able to do that, or on the telephone, again, we can do three-way conversations with the supplier, and we can try and assess any problems. Could be metering problems, could be billing problems, could be just a general tariff inquiry, but we can help on that front. We've got a very close relationship between energy use, water use. So we find, if someone needs advice around energy, they may need advice around water as well. Of 85% of the energy used in the home, we've got 63% used for energy and 22% used for water. So you can see there the relationship. So at the same time, we're able to give energy advice, we're able to give water advice. There's certain social tariffs that people can apply for, such as water support scheme, water sure scheme. There's also debt support, and we also give advice around water efficiency as well. Whilst we're in the home, we're very much working on a principle of what we'd call making every contact count. So that means whilst we're there, when we're in that very privileged position to be able to try and support somebody, we're looking at all the different ways in which we can provide support. And that would be, after the 12 years that we've been operating as Green Doctors, we built up quite a large network of referral partners. And that could be for a variety of things. It could be for housing issues, it could be for heating repairs, it could be for damp mold issues. It could be for things like food parcels. These are things like for extra support and a variety of other issues that we may come across. We're able to report those back and hopefully maybe speed some action up in some way or highlight a particular case. Whilst we're in the home, we're also offering certain practical measures. So we'll be installing things such as LED light bulbs that can very quickly reduce energy costs, increase energy efficiency. We're installing reflective panels. So these are reflective radiator panels, which would go behind radiators on external walls or adjoining walls to another property. And it's trying to reduce the amount of heat that's leaking from the property and reflect it back into the home to save you some more money and just to improve those levels of thermal comfort. And similarly with the draft proofing. So we're able to do this at the time on the home visit. So if there's drafts coming maybe around a door or around a window, or maybe there's some holes, or so there's some leakage around pipes or around the flue of the boiler or around the meter cupboard, we can have a look at those and try and make the house a little bit more airtight and a little bit more comfortable as well. At the same time, we're advising things about, as I mentioned, about damp and mold. So we're looking at things about how to ventilate the house adequately at the same time as heating it to try and reduce those levels of damp and mold. And as I mentioned, as we were signposting for extra support, that's a very important aspect of the work that the Green Doctors do. So it's very much of a holistic kind of service, and that's why it's called the Green Doctors. So it's more than an energy advice service. It's a lot more comprehensive than that. One of the things in which we're looking for is that just comes part and parcel with working on projects to do with fuel poverty or energy vulnerability, as it's sometimes known as. Is vulnerability in the home. So many people may have very different types of requirements and may be vulnerable for many different types of reasons. One of the extra support things that I mentioned earlier would include the Priority Services Register. So this is a register where vulnerable people can access. So it could be an elderly person, it could be a family with a young child, it could be someone with a health condition. It's very wide ranging that people can access the Priority Services Register, but it's very simple to do. It can be done through the energy supplier, through the district network operator. So that could be Northern Power Grid, Northern Gas Networks, or Cadent. And this gives access to services such as like a password or a bill nominee scheme. So again, if someone lacks the capacity to look after their energy account themselves, they could nominate someone to speak on their behalf, and they give the consent for that person to act on their behalf. And that can be very important when we're going into somebody's home or we're helping someone on the telephone and we're trying to liaise with suppliers. We need the consent for the actual account holder. So that's a very important aspect for people who don't have that capacity to deal with those kind of issues themselves. You can have bills in different kinds of format, large print, braille, meter reading service. So it's very important that, and there's been a lot of emphasis, certainly in the last 6 months, about accurate meter reads. Because we've had many different suppliers going bust, some being taken over by others. So it's very important that we have accurate meter reads, and then we get billed for exactly what we use rather than having estimated bills. And the meters may be located in a difficult to access position. It could be under the cupboard, in the cellar. So having a meter reading service for those people who aren't able to access the meters, it can be very helpful in managing bills. Smart meters also can come into play in this aspect. You have meters moved to a more accessible location within a limit for the same reasons. One of the major aspects, I think, for the Priority Services Register is having updates.
We've lost you, Simon. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Is that okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Simon.
Yeah.
Where did I get up to where you couldn't hear me?
Down to the meter moving.
Okay, fine. That's fine. Yeah, and the meter moving for the same reasons. For it's difficult to maybe access the meters to read the meters, so they could move to a more accessible location. One of the major aspects, I think, for the Priority Services Register is having updates on notifications. If there's going to be, say, for example, some planned works on the electrical network within a certain area, and there'll be people in those areas who are vulnerable and maybe dependent on electricity for, say, for medical equipment, or even just to keep medicines in the refrigerator or for a stair lift. So those people would need some kind of notification because they would have to put some kind of steps in place during the time they were off supply. And similarly, if there was an unplanned interruption to supply, say for example a storm or a flood, and people are put off grid for a while, then measures can be put in place to try and support those people for the length of time that they may be off grid, such as like generators. The Priority Services Register, it doesn't just apply to energy. You also have water providers like Yorkshire Water, for example. They have their Priority Services Register. So if, say, pipes become frozen, bottled water can be sent out for them, and they have other support services as well as part of their register. And a free gas safety check as well. That's as it's written there, subject to further criteria. But also a very important aspect that people, just a reminder here that people do have, regular gas services, but obviously people who are tenants of Johnnie Johnson will have that as part of their the tenancy. Okay. I'll just talk a little bit in more detail about energy efficiency around the home. And as I mentioned earlier, very important aspect of the work that we do, and even more so these days, particularly when we're unable to save people money on their tariffs in the way that we could do some years ago, because of the difference in the energy market. At one time, not so long ago, we could save people around £270 on an average about switching their energy tariff from, say, a standard variable tariff to a fixed term tariff. These days, the cheapest option is the standard variable tariff. So that takes that aspect away. So the energy efficiency around the home really comes to be an important aspect in trying to maximise the income. And I'll just go into a bit more detail. Firstly, well, how warm should a home be? And that does depend on people's different circumstances, what their levels of comfort are. But this is a public health recommendation here. So the recommended living temperature, as you can see here, is between 18 and 21 degrees Celsius, or 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. As you can see, going up, most of the cases that we're coming across are coming down on the cold side, but not in all cases. And I just want to emphasize here about keeping the temperature trying to be between 18 and 21. Use of thermostats, programmers, timers to enable to do this and to be able to regulate our temperatures more evenly and more consistently. As we increase the temperature, it's a likelihood, it's absolute, it's a certainty there's going to be higher energy costs. And as an approximation, for each 1 degree Celsius that the temperature is increased, for example, from 21 to 22, that's going to put approximately 10% onto the energy bills. And if we're looking at the price cap now, which is £2,500 per year as an average home, that's £250 a year, just going up for 1 degree, and so on and so on. So this is where we can really get really high bills. So one of the first things we're looking at, obviously, is temperatures in the home and advising on that. Most often it's a case where we're looking at too cold temperatures in the home. And as we can see here from this diagram, as we go down to in the 15 degrees bracket, we've got an increased chance of respiratory illnesses. I mentioned earlier about the excess winter death figures, and those being an average of 32,000. Those are mainly comprised of 3 groups: respiratory, cardiovascular, and mental health conditions, dementia. And as the temperature decreases, the increased chance of respiratory illnesses also goes higher and higher. The risk is much higher. And as we can see these days, there's many people who, because of colds, flus, the effects of COVID and so on, there's a lot of people with respiratory illnesses, and a lot of people who are struggling to heat their home adequately. So this is quite a serious situation. And certainly as the temperatures begin to drop, you've got risks of heart attacks and strokes, and that's because maybe people who have an increased prevalence to heart attacks and strokes, the blood thickens as the temperature drops, it gets colder, and then it makes it more difficult to circulate around the body, and that causes pressure on those vital organs, and that's what can cause those cardiovascular illnesses. So whilst it is a very subjective kind of guide, it does have very good meaning and very strong relevance in terms of health, well-being within the home. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And I mentioned earlier about heat leaking from the home. So if we start, this is an uninsulated property, and it's just given where the main percentages of heat loss through the house. So we've got the largest amount of heat loss is coming through this uninsulated side wall here, 35%. That's a huge amount. Depending on the type of home, cavity wall insulation, as I mentioned earlier, we're working across all tenancy types, so this might be relevant to other people who aren't with Johnnie Johnson Housing to pass on this information. There's grants available for things like cavity wall insulation, and they can really reduce the costs and reduce the amount of heat leaking and improve the health and well-being for the people inside the home. We've got quite a low-cost measure, and we can see loft insulation, because 25%, a quarter of the heat is disappearing straight through the roof. Heat's rising, so that's kind of no surprise really. But for the actual costs of having loft insulation for this home, and to reduce that amount of heat leaking, that would be a very beneficial measure to have loft insulation. We can see here that we've got approximately 10% coming through, 10%, 15% coming through windows and doors. So this is a non-double glazed house, so understandably a lot of houses are double glazed these days, but not all, and some aren't functioning as double glazing units should be as to an adequate standard, maybe because the seals are old or the units need replacing. Once that happens, they no longer have that insulating effect, and so you're going to get these kind of percentages of heat leaking through faulty double glazing windows, gaps around doors, and this is why the draft proofing measure becomes really important. Quite surprisingly, maybe to many, you've got 15% of heat leaking through the floor. So we've got many different types of properties. Some have stone floors, some have wooden floors, potential to have insulation under timber floors, under wooden floors. On solid floors is more difficult, but it really comes emphasizes the need for perhaps floor coverings. We have a lot of laminate floors, but we could have maybe carpets, underlays, that kind of thing to reduce this amount, this 15%. But that just gives a general idea and a bit of a picture there of where the heat is leaking from our homes. Okay, going into a little bit more depth about the energy efficiency advice. And this is very much looking as a green doctor perspective. So as mentioned, we've got a green doctor in the home, going through the grants, discounts, the tariffs, the water support, going through the energy efficiency advice. And we're very much looking on a room by room basis. What can we do in this particular room, in this instance, in the living room? There's many things we can do. These are just some of the things. One of the major things that we would recommend firstly is having the most energy efficient appliances, and that's going to be in the living room, in the kitchen, mainly. So TVs and other appliances, games consoles, quite high energy use items. The most energy efficiency appliances are always going to be the quickest way to try and reduce energy consumption, but as we know, a lot of people can't afford the most energy efficiency appliances, so that makes that a little bit more difficult. There's other things we can do. As I mentioned before, putting LED light bulbs in, quite a simple, low-cost measure. Not only just LED light bulbs, but also looking at the number of light bulbs that we're using in a home. Personally, I see more and more lights in the homes than usual. We've got the inset lights in the ceiling. We may have 10 lights coming on in one room, or 3 or 4 bulbs in one lamp stand. So I think it's also looking at the type of appliances we have in the first place, not only energy efficiency, also are they practical? Do we need certain appliances in the first place? We're looking at moving furniture around. That's always a really quick way to be able to allow, for example, if there's a sofa or a chest of drawers or a wardrobe that's directly in front of the radiator, that's going to inhibit the amount of heat that's being output from that particular radiator. So it's not, we're paying for that. It's very expensive energy, but it's not being, we're not feeling the full benefits of that because it's not circulated around the home. And it's also could also cause some problems with damp mold condensation if we're trapping air in and we're not allowing things to ventilate. So a simple thing would be to, just look at where the furniture is placed in relation to the radiators and the heating system. I mentioned earlier reflective panels around the radiator, so we've got the reducing amount of heat that's leaking straight through the wall there. And that's more effective on different types of properties. So for solid walls, for example, we haven't got cavity wall insulation, a reflective panel would be more beneficial than having a wall which already has cavity wall insulation. It would reduce the amount of heat leaking to a greater degree. Looking at what we've got in terms of like curtains, or do we have blinds? Having some thermal curtains in winter could be fairly inexpensive. And we could really see quite a quick payback period of time with this. So we could, have the curtains just above the radiator there, nice thick curtains, really reducing the amount of heat that's leaking straight through the window. And we saw earlier between 10 and 15% is going through there. Quite a simple measure. And then we're looking at things like chimneys. Do we have open chimneys, particularly in out of season? We could have chimney balloons, again reducing the amount of heat that's leaking through there and reducing the amount of drafts as well. Quite simple measures. Okay, so there's lots of things we can do in the living room. And one of the things I mentioned earlier is the use of thermostats, programming timers to regulate the temperature in our home. So it's coming on at particular times of the day, rather than starting from 0 degrees and then building up to say 16 and 17. It's a more effective, more economical way of using the heating system in most circumstances. Then we're looking at things in the kitchen. And again, most energy efficient appliances is the rule, if possible. Many homes we go to, we can see where people may be trying to reduce their cost by buying food in bulk, particularly like frozen food. And it may go into a very old, like 10-year-old chest freezer. And that chest freezer will have a very high energy consumption, and it'll offset the savings that we're trying to make from buying the food in bulk. Because it's a high energy use appliance. Similar with the washing machines. And when we are using the washing machine, try to ensure that we have a full load. We don't want to overload the washing machine, but we want to try and use it to its maximum effect. Also have the washing temperature on a lower temperature, so you could have maybe 30, 40 degrees, or put it on the eco setting. If we're looking at things like cooking, keeping lids on pans, that's going to reduce the amount of cooking time. Things will boil quicker, for example, but also reduce the amount of water vapor that's being distributed throughout the house. So without the lid on the pan, we'll get the steam. And what happens with that steam, it'll find the coldest spots in the home. Typically it would be like in the bathroom, or you might see in the kitchen somewhere, but that's where that water vapor will accumulate. So having lids on pans, keeping doors closed, using extractor fans, those things can help damp mold condensation, also reduce cooking time and reduce costs. Things like using a washing up bowl. I mentioned before about the relationship between energy and water. So reducing the amount of perhaps hot water that's being used, rather than filling a large sink, we can use a bowl, reduce that amount of, so we're doing these things every day. And I think the important aspect to make is that each day we might be doing these things 2 or 3 times. When we change the behavior a little bit and look at how things we can reduce our energy usage, it can really make a huge difference, because that accumulates over, say, an annual period or a 10-year period, and we can really see our bills coming down. Things like using the oven, for example. Lots of discussion these days about slow cookers, air fryers, different ways in which we can cook things, perhaps using a microwave, more energy efficient ways of cooking and thinking about how we prepare food. Using the hob more, gas hobs more efficient than electric, but again, it just depends how we use them. Dishwasher, do we need to use a dishwasher? Similar tumble dryers. high energy use appliances, looking at where we use those. And again, if we do use them, have them on full loads and try and use them in the most efficient way possible. In the bathroom, I think one of the major ways in which we can save money in the bathroom is looking at our bathing. So reducing or cutting out completely having baths, having showers, and looking at the times that we're actually having showers. The recommended time will be, people say, 4 minutes, but I don't think we need to be too military and disciplined about this in such a way as it makes us stressed, because we do see that sometimes where people take it counteracts some kind of the health and well-being. I think it's just being conscious of those actions and behaviours that we do. So taking shorter showers, yeah. Do we need to be in there so long? And particularly if we have things like electric showers. So if we have like a referral and we've got a high energy use case and we can't locate, or the person can't locate how that energy is being used, we're often looking at things like showers, immersion heaters, the use of electric portable heaters, those kind of things, because they do cost a lot of money. If people are on water meters, repairing dripping taps, obviously going to save quite a lot of money. Water accumulate very quickly. Turning off the tap when brushing teeth. These are very old kind of tips and advice, but it's still very, very applicable. A number of people just keep the tap running and all that water is just going to waste. Again, if you're on a water meter, that's going to cost you money. But also we're looking at the environment. We had droughts this year earlier on, so we're looking at the wider picture as well. I think looking at, we've also got a towel rail here, and in most bathrooms we would have perhaps a heated towel rail or a radiator there. And I think it's just being conscious again of the little things that we do. So perhaps we have a shower, we dry ourselves, we put the wet towel on the radiator, and that may stay there all day. And that's rather than taking the radiator, the towel off the radiator once it's dry, it may stay there for longer than we might just forget about it. So it's trapping the heat in. And not allow it to circulate, and particularly in the bathroom where we want the heat to circulate to try and reduce those effects of damp mold condensation. It's just being aware of our patterns of habits and the way we do things. Okay. Looking outside the home, I mentioned loft insulation earlier on as being a great measure. 25% of the heat is leaking through the roof. For maybe average cost of around £400 to £500, we can save £250 per year having loft insulation. So again, that's a great measure to have. I mentioned cavity wall insulation before. Here we've got savings around £245 a year. A more expensive measure, but again, the payback time is quite quick. Double glazing, yeah, that's mentioned that earlier. And not only having double glazing, but having effective working double glazing. So looking at it actually functioning. Is the condensation in between the two panes, for example? That would be an indicator that there's the seals are broken, so it's having those replaced. Looking at drafts, I mentioned earlier about pipes, maybe pipe work coming out of buildings. And there may be gaps around the pipes, which is causing drafts going into the house. It could be around the meter cupboards. So it's looking around the home, underneath windowsills, around skirting boards. We could perhaps use sealant. And it's looking at making the house more airtight, more comfortable, but at the same time also keeping in mind the need for ventilation as well. With those things. Drying clothes, that can be quite problematic, particularly in winter, if we're drying clothes outside. And then we have the difficulty if we're using a tumble dryer inside the home, we're going to have high energy costs. Dry clothes outside when we can, or inside if we can use drying racks nearby to radiators rather than putting clothes on radiators to reduce the amount of water vapor again in the home. That would be quite a beneficial way. Or radiator racks which go onto radiators and you can hang the clothes, not directly but just on the rack. That could be an excellent way of drying clothes in winter. To make some of these things that I've been mentioning a little bit more tangible, in terms of annual cost savings, also we're an environmental charity, and I'm sure lots of other people have the environment as a major concern. So turning devices off around the home on standby, those things that we might call like phantom power, that can save around £40 annual cost savings, and that would equate to 50 grams of carbon being saved. That doesn't mean a great deal, but when we look at we say we can equate that to driving miles, that's 180 miles from Manchester to Newcastle, 50 kilograms of carbon saved. Draft proofing, very cheap measure, and this is something that we do. This is it's a completely free service that we offer, not just the advice, the practical measures also. But if people want to do these things themselves, £30, you're saving that in 1 year. You're also saving 105 kilograms of carbon, equivalent to 380 miles. Simple thing, turning lights off in a room, £14 a year. It doesn't cost anything to do, it's just a behavioural change, and you're also saving a small amount of carbon there. And similarly for a washing machine on 30 degrees, and having a full load will also contribute to the cost savings. We've got the equivalent carbon saving there. Another behavioural change, doesn't cost anything to do, just boiling as much water as we need in the kettle, 10 grams. And one of the major ones, look at the bottom here, keeping shower time to 4 minutes, £20 a year, 195 kilograms of carbon, equivalent to 700 miles driving Birmingham to Aberdeen and back again. So that's a huge amount. And these are just a small number of things that we can do. If we can do more things, we could be talking around £400 to £500 a year savings, just by the energy efficiency advice or the things that you can implement into our daily routines. Okay, I mentioned some of the measures, the draft proofing, energy saving, LED light bulbs, the reflective panels. I haven't mentioned smart meters, another excellent way to monitor our energy usage. The idea is to have more control of what we're doing, to have more understanding, have more control over our energy usage, our energy costs. And smart meter is a good way of doing that. It's not that particularly having a smart meter is going to save you money by having a smart meter, but it will supply the information to be able to identify maybe high use appliances, so we can cut down on the energy usage. It could help us perhaps to budget better. It could also help us to have meter readings, so you can have automatic meter readings, and I mentioned earlier about the importance of that. So we get accurate billing and not estimated bills, and we're just paying for exactly what we use. And then people can top up using smart meters as well, you know, if they have prepayment meters, for example, rather than going out to the shop and having to do that. And that's particularly effective, say, for example, certainly in COVID, but certainly in winter as well, where people might have difficulty getting out and about. So, yeah, we advise on all of these things, and those are some of the measures that we install. Okay, there's different ways in which we can ask for help from our service, from the Green Doctor service. And as I mentioned earlier, we're Groundwork is a national charity, and many of the trusts have Green Doctor programs. So I mentioned earlier that we're Groundwork Yorkshire, we're based in Leeds, we have Groundwork Manchester, we have Groundwork West Midlands, we have Groundwork North East, and we have many Green Doctor programs across the country. So these are some of the different ways in which we can find out more information, and how we can contact the Green Doctors. So it's speaking to Johnnie Johnson Housing Community Officer, speak to Fortem. So we've got Rebecca on the session here, or we can speak to ourselves directly, and there's our website details. Okay. Yes, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thanks for that, Simon. That was really, really useful. So yeah, as Simon said, open to any questions. Okay. One question.
Can we make a sorry, Christy.
No, go on.
Can we make so to make a referral to yourselves? Is it just that last screen? is there a referral form on your website or?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we as far as Johnnie Johnson, we are currently working on the referral form. But in the meanwhile, if anybody does want to be considered for the Green Doctor service, just use one of those mechanisms. Contact your community housing officer, contact your wellbeing officer here at Johnnie Johnson, speak to a Fortem operative if and when they are out in your home, or again through the Green Doctor website. Not too sure if that fully answers the question.
Okay, yeah. I just wondered if there was a referral form that we could just fill in or something like that, but.
Can I just come in there?
Yes,
Christine?
you can, Lucy. Yeah.
Joanne, we've just created the form now, so I've posted that into the chat here. So that's the online form. There will obviously be physical copies that you can handwrite, but we would encourage you to do the online one.
Thanks,
Oh, that's
Lucy.
fab. Thanks, Lisa.
No worries. I feel like, Simon, I'm going to have to go on a bit of a hunt around the house now and switching things off and unplugging things and pouring water out of the kettle, because I always put it full, but I always fill it full, you know, before I boil it. So there's lots of quick takeaway tips there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, some of the things that we can do, no cost at all, and I think it's just being a little bit more conscious of just the little things we do, and that, like I said earlier, the little things that we do 2 or 3 or 4 times a day really do accumulate, and they do make a difference.
Thank you. Just one question that I was asked a day or so ago was, can I refer anyone to the Green Doctor service?
There is an eligibility criteria for the Green Doctor service, and I think I've maybe shared that with you, or I can do so again. But it is very, very wide ranging. In terms of like tenancy types, then that's across all tenancies. And in terms of like eligibility, it is very wide ranging. With there's an income threshold of 30,000. But there's also it's not just based on that. If someone has a vulnerability, it could be a young child, it could be an elderly person, it could be a person with a long-term health condition. There's many different criteria, so it's not just based on income. But we will try, if they didn't qualify for that particular service, we would give advice on where they could find support.
Lovely, thanks, Simon. Good. Does anyone else have any questions? No.
Can I ask, when is it now live, this access to Green Doctors? When did it go live for Johnnie Johnson Housing?
Yeah, apologies, Lucy. I should have mentioned this earlier. Yes, the service across all of Johnnie Johnson's regions, working with the Green Doctors, it went live on the 1st of February, so just earlier this week.
So can I just jump in there as well? So for customers of Johnnie Johnson, if a Fortem operative comes to complete a repair at your property, they are likely to ask the question if you would like a referral to the Green Doctor service. So, you know, if you do, please let them know. There is just an automatic form on their tablet when they close the job down with yourselves, and that will come straight through to the Green Doctors. So you don't actually have to do anything. We can do that on your behalf.
Thanks, Rebecca. So, any more questions? I hope it's been useful for everyone. Does anyone want to give any feedback? I'll take that as yes, it was a really good session. Okay, well, again, thanks ever so much for your time. I know time is precious at the moment, so thanks for taking the hour out, and I think you've got a little bit extra time there. You've got a spare 15 minutes. So yeah, so thanks very much. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, thank
really
you, Simon. Yeah,
thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.